Arthur wandered around the camp for a bit, checking in on everyone. Most of the gang was all in one spot. They were all staying warm inside a large single-room building. The ladies were sitting next to Sadie Adler. They were trying to comfort her as best they could. Quite understandably, she was still in complete shambles. Arthur asked her how she was holding up, but she didn't give much of an answer. At this point, Sadie did not care what will happen to her. Her life, as she knew it, was destroyed when the O'Driscolls arrived at her door. Not being the most delicate person, Arthur made the wise decision to simply wish her the best and move on to little Jack, who was sitting directly in front of the crackling fireplace. Jack looked up at Arthur and asked him if they were all going to be okay, if the bad men are still chasing them. Even though the Vandalins were all outlaws, people who would eagerly spit in the face of civilized society and shoot anyone who stands in their way, they treated Jack kindly. He didn't ask to live on the wrong side of the law. No. He was simply born into it. He did not get to choose. Not like everyone else, at least. So, Arthur, not wanting to worry little Jack, told him that he thinks everyone is going to be okay, and to not worry about a thing. Sitting next to Jack in a chair was Abigail. She was keeping a close eye on John, who had definitely seen better days. They both thanked Arthur for all that he had done the other day. If it wasn't for him and Javier, John would have been a frozen corpse. Even though Arthur didn't care much for John, he was glad to see him still alive. The last two individuals that were staying warm inside that old building were Leopold Strauss and Reverend Swanson. Strauss wore a sour expression on his face. He did not hide his discomfort. A loan shark isn't very useful if there are not any customers. He was too frail to be of any help around the camp, so he simply sulked and waited for things to improve. During all this, there was Swanson, citing passages from the Holy Book in his hands. When he had finished, one of the girls said that it was beautiful, but asked what it meant. Swanson solemnly shook his head. He did not know, but it brought him comfort all the same. Even though Arthur was the workhorse of the gang, able to do almost anything with the right motivation, he couldn't change Mother Nature. The wagons were still snowed in. They were all going to be stuck in the Grizzly Mountains until the thaw comes. Whenever that will be. Telling everyone to keep strong and warm, Arthur walked back outside to look for the others. He came across Mr. Pearson, the group's chef, cutting up a rabbit. As Arthur approached, Pearson told him that they were going to starve. Arthur blew off his complaint, saying that they'll be okay. But Pearson continued. A single rabbit and a few cans of food were nowhere near enough to keep everyone fed. He had sent Lenny and Bill to go out and hunt, but they didn't come back with anything. Arthur was not surprised. Lenny is more into books and hunting, and Bill, well, Bill is just an idiot. Charles, who was nearby and overheard all this, said that he'll do it, though Arthur immediately interjected and told Charles that he still needed to rest. Charles had badly burned his hand before they had all gotten stuck up in the grizzlies, and therefore was in no shape to do such a thing. Charles did not want to hear it. Work needed to be done, and he hated just sitting still and waiting. Of course, his hand was still in far too rough of shape to pull back a bow, and so he couldn't hunt by himself. Charles told Pearson that if there was meat up in those mountains, he could find it, and Arthur could kill it. With that, Arthur shrugged and followed Charles, whom was already walking toward their horses. As Arthur caught up to him, Charles handed Arthur a bow. Arthur was hesitant. He tried archery in the past, and he was not very good at it. This was irrelevant to Charles. If Arthur used a gun, he would scare all the animals around him into hiding. With a bow, that would not be an issue, even if he missed. Not being able to argue, Arthur reluctantly mounted his horse and followed the main trail out of camp and into the wilderness. With all the noise and smells coming from camp, they knew that they would have to ride a good distance before they were able to find anything. So the two had some time to talk. Still concerned about Charles, Arthur asked how his hand was doing. Aside from not being able to pull a bowstring, it's fine. If he can keep from straining it too hard, his hand should be back to normal in just a few days. As they continued to put distance between themselves and camp, Arthur couldn't help but take stock on everything that had happened. Being chased out of Blackwater, getting stuck in the snowstorm, having a run-in with the O'Driscolls, and saving John. He has had a lot put on himself recently. Charles, listening to this, said that he wished he could have done more to help, but Arthur did not mean for it to come out like that. It was just a lot to think back on. There was something scratching at Charles's mind. Much like Arthur, he was not on the ferry boat when it was attacked, and wondered what exactly happened. Arthur had told Charles what little he knew from what Javier had told him. Whatever exactly happened, it sure wasn't good. Seeing an area where the snow was not quite as thick, Charles led Arthur off the trail that they had been following. This was perfect. The snow was low enough that a little vegetation was starting to break through, and Charles figured that chances are some animals had already began grazing. Not wanting to spook any potential nearby game, the two dismounted and proceeded to search the area on foot. Charles's hunting instincts were sharp. It was not long before they found some animal tracks in the snow. Arthur couldn't tell what they belonged to, but Charles could. With a quick look at them, he knew they were from a deer and began to follow them. Sure enough, the tracks led them to a deer grazing on what it could find out in the snow. While it was focused on foraging for food, Arthur readied his bow. Moving up beside him, Charles coached Arthur on how to properly pull back the string and line up his shot. Arthur slowly notched an arrow and carefully pulled back the bowstring. After a brief pause, Arthur let loose the arrow. It cut through the frigid air swiftly and silently. Before the deer knew it, it was laying on the ground with an arrow having pierced its neck. Satisfied with the kill, Charles congratulated Arthur. Arthur said it was a lot easier when the target did not shoot back. Even though this was enough meat for everyone, Charles wanted an extra deer, just in case. Arthur, still feeling pretty accomplished, agreed with no complaints. It wasn't long before more tracks were found, and the events from before repeated themselves. Carrying the two fresh deer carcasses, Charles and Arthur loaded them onto their horses and started to ride off back to camp. Happy with what they found, Arthur couldn't help but feel a little optimistic. Considering the past few days, maybe their luck was finally starting to turn around. Charles felt the same, but he knew that for things to really get better, they needed to put more effort into getting out of the Grizzly Mountains. Though he was right, Arthur knew that wouldn't happen anytime soon. They had people that were still too weak to travel, and the wagons were too snowed in. Not to mention, once they do eventually work their way back down the mountain, they are still wanted men. It's definitely not an ideal situation, but maybe things will be alright. It's a big country after all. Surely Dutch and Jose will find them somewhere to hide. As they rode, Charles mentioned that he feels uneasy around Sadie. He said that she has a real wild look in her eye. Arthur was not surprised at all. Anyone would be like that after going through what she did. Charles was curious on what they should do with her. This was the first time anything like this had happened since he joined up. Arthur said that they will wait until they are back on their feet. Once that's done, she might have some family that they could bring her to. The O'Driscolls really took everything from her. Speaking of which, Charles didn't know why there was such a feud between Dutch and Colm. He used to only hear them being mentioned in conversation. Nowadays, it seems that they are on everyone's mind pretty much all the time. Charles had only been running with the Vanderlands for about 6 months now, so he was still quite arguably new to all this. Arthur told him that that was a very long story. Colm and Dutch go way back, and not in the good way. They've been competing for scores since before Arthur had joined. Charles asked Arthur how long he's been riding with Dutch. Arthur took a brief moment to think and said about 20 years. Charles was taken aback. That was a long time to stay with one gang. Before Arthur met Dutch, he was just an orphan living on the streets. He would regularly steal, get into fights, all that. When Dutch met young Arthur, he took pity on the boy and gave him a home. Hosea and Dutch taught Arthur, and John for that matter, all sorts of things, such as how to read and write. Of course, they were also taught more unscrupulous lessons as well. Charles gave out a hearty chuckle. In a way, Dutch saved Arthur, and gave him someone and something to believe in. It's been a hard life, sure, but Arthur wouldn't have it any other way. This was actually pretty nice for Arthur. Him and Charles never really talked to each other much. Arthur reckoned Charles never expected any of this. The Blackwater mess, being stuck up in the mountains. But Charles didn't really mind it too much. Sooner or later, a job goes wrong. Nature of life. Arthur was honestly surprised that Charles hadn't ran off yet. Most people who found themselves in a situation would run, without a second thought. Charles looked at him and asked if Arthur wanted him to leave. Arthur quickly responded with a no. It's just, Arthur knew he could run it alone. No problem. Charles did that for a long time. He was done with that. Besides, this is a place where he feels like he belongs. Dutch treats him fair. Most of them do. For a fellow with a black father and a native mother, well, that is not normally the case. He was happy to be accepted and needed. They had been riding for a while now, and camp finally came into view. It was about time. Charles and Arthur had been gone for a good while. They rode into camp, hitched their horses, and brought the 2 deer carcasses over to Pearson, whom was having a friendly chat with the group's parasite, simply known as Uncle. Honestly, Uncle probably would have been kicked out of the group a long time ago, if Dutch did not find him so entertaining. Not in the mood to deal with him, Arthur shooed Uncle away. With a regretful tone, Charles bid his farewell. A man with a burned hand can't really hold a knife straight enough to skin an animal. But that was fine. Arthur helped Pearson skin the deer and set them up to be butchered. With Pearson being able to handle the rest on his own, Arthur walked off to find where the rest of the boys were.